Chers téléspectateurs de WafricaTV, bonjour. Bienvenue à cette émission dont le titre ce matin est Global Health and Global Bioethics. Nous recevons ce matin deux philosophes qui ont accepté de sortir des amphis, des salles de classe, des livres pour venir présenter à Mondo Vision leur conception de la santé globale et de la bioéthique. Et je voudrais, à l'entame de cette émission, commencer par le professeur Ngalim Banfegha. Bon, pour une définition conceptuelle, qu'entendez-vous par Global Health and Global Bioethics?
Yeah. If we want to talk about global health, just from the word globe, universal, yeah, we are talking about the present situation or health situation of the people in the world, given the present interconnectedness that we have with regard to that we have today. And if you take the example of the coronavirus, how it begins from one area and spreads all over the world, we see that it's a concern of the globe. So when we talk about the global health, we mean the well-being of the universal persons in the world. So that's what we talk about global health. And global bioethics will have to do with what are those principles, what are the principles, the ethical issues of life that will be used to consider problems in health, or questions or answer to questions with regard to health.
Ok. Professeur Jérôme Tosam, quand moi j'ai entendu Global Health, j'ai pensé à une santé davantage holistique. Bon, je n'ai pas étendu la compréhension à l'échelle du monde. Bon, est-ce que vous partagez la même opinion que le professeur Ngalim qui venait d'intervenir à ce sujet?
Yeah, I share his perspective, and I think that we live in a world now, in a very interconnected and interdependent world, in which the health problems of a certain small community of the world has become, needs to become, ought to become the concern of the whole world. You know, in the past, where there was some kind of geographical or physical disconnection between, and even, disconnection between different parts of the world, between the rich and the poor, you could easily, I mean, when I say you, I mean a country or a region of the world could easily insulate itself from some epidemics or epidemics that were happening in other parts of the world. But now, with globalization, where there is international connection, international travels, and things like that, it is hard for a local health problem to remain a local health problem. It easily becomes a global health concern. And in a world which is largely capitalistic and governed by neoliberal values and principles, the world is beginning to understand that no, the best way for us to protect ourselves is to protect the other. And this is very, very similar to a typical African solidaristic approach, whereby we don't only think about health from a certain regional, national perspective, but we think about health from a much larger geographical setting, I mean from a global setting, where the health concerns of one part of the world should become, you see, when I say should become, I'm using a normative expression here. Yes. But so it is both, from a perspective of bioethics, it is both a descriptive and a prescriptive view, okay, which I'm trying to...
Professor Ngalim, I need you to come back to that concept, global bioethics.
Yes.
You didn't explain it very clearly. I need you to come back again on that concept. Because mon problème ici, est-ce que quand vous parlez de bioéthique, il s'agit de la capacité que nous avons, à partir des sciences qui touchent l'intégrité humaine, à juger de la valeur des actes posés? Ou alors, s'agit-il d'une éthique a priori qu'on veut appliquer à la médecine ou à toutes les sciences de la vie, ou bien les sciences du vivant? Voyez-vous? Bon, toutes les sciences qui touchent à la vie devraient-elles être fondées sur des principes d'éthique, ou alors faut-il qu'à l'intérieur de cette science émerge une forme d'éthique, là qui n'est plus a priori, mais qui est inventée à l'intérieur de la discipline? Qu'en pensez-vous?
Yeah, I think that within the context of global health, I think these principles of bioethics, they need to emerge. That is, they need to emerge to meet the exigencies of the situation that we have at hand. Because if we are talking about, he brought up the issue of that is the interconnectedness. Yeah, I'm looking at it as we live as it's an issue of encounter. This becomes an ethical issue when there are many. It becomes an ethical issue when when life is seen as an encounter with the other, and what happens to the other has to affect. What happens to the other affects me. Then there are reasonable grounds for which we have to establish principles that have to guide our practices either in medicine or in science with regard to, that's what I was talking about. And because all these will be related to life. That's why I was talking about the bioethical principles there.
Yes. Professeur Jérôme, est-ce qu'à ce niveau, à partir de la définition qu'il a donnée, ou alors de ce qu'il dit, de l'opinion qu'il a de global ethics, global bioethics, bon, pensez-vous est-ce que vous pourrez nous donner une définition qui nous permettrait de séparer la perception que nous avons de l'éthique à la perception que nous avons de la bioéthique?
I think in the simplest terms, in simple terms, ethics is that sub-area of philosophy that's concerned with values, with the norms that guide behavior. It permits us to distinguish between correct and incorrect behavior. It's the science of norms. Bioethics is, by extension, that sub-area of ethics which is concerned with the ethical issues that arise or may arise from new developments in science and technology, from issues that affect life in general, life. So, but now when we attach now global bioethics, like I said when I was given my understanding or conception of the concept of global health, global bioethics is both a description and a prescription. As a description, it gives us an idea of the different ethical principles across cultures that are employed in reflections about life in general, about development in medicine, development in biotechnology, and so on. But normatively or prescriptively also, it calls on us to pay attention to the diverse values, cultural values that exist in the world in relation to questions of health and healthcare, in questions of life and death.
Professeur Jérôme,
oui.
À une autre émission, à cette même télévision, nous avons parlé de la médecine traditionnelle africaine.
Oui.
Et on envisageait les conditions de possibilité d'une décolonisation conceptuelle dans ces pratiques. Bon, moi je voudrais revenir à ce niveau en vous posant la question de savoir, lorsqu'on parle de bioéthique en médecine, je vous pose à tous les deux la question.
Oui.
Oui, lorsqu'on parle de bioéthique en médecine, et qu'il existe une médecine alternative qui pouvoir été trop négligée et qu'il faudrait remettre en selle, est-ce que dans ces conditions, la bioéthique doit être conçue de la même manière que dans la médecine moderne, selon vous? La parole est à qui veut la prendre?
Maybe, okay, thank you. So, you see, I think even the question of decolonization can, or well applies in the context of global bioethics. And you see, largely, the question of bioethics in its modern sense, in its academic sense, is a purely Western affair. It developed from the West. But from a conceptual perspective,
modern
it is
affair or Western affair?
Modern Western affair. It's a contemporary development. But conceptually, it is as old as the practice of medicine itself. You could trace it back in the Western world from Hippocrates. But, I must say, it's important to note that wherever medicine has ever been practiced, there has existed ethical values that guide the practice of medicine. Yes.
So, voilà, vous parlez, c'est pour vous relancer, vous parlez des valeurs éthiques qui devraient commander la pratique médicale, n'est-ce pas? Bon, mais, tous les hôpitaux à travers le monde n'ont pas le même standing. Bon, est-ce qu'on ne peut pas envisager à ce niveau la flexibilité de la compréhension bioéthique, de la prise en charge bioéthique des mécanismes de santé en fonction des localités et en fonction même des perceptions de la maladie? Professeur Ngalim, est-ce que vous pouvez...
I think that's the point I wanted to raise. We have to also we have to contextualize some of these principles, because let me just pick a very simple example. If within the African culture, the idea of consent, of autonomy, may be understood differently within the Western culture. And if I have to give my consent with regard to a particular illness, my consent may not be as individual as an African. It may involve that individual autonomy may have to do with consultation of family members before such a decision is taken, and that is seen. That's from where my autonomy will be seen, and even from the justice, non-maleficence, and beneficence, these have to be put in context depending on the cultural values of the people.
Professeur B, certaines prises de décision dans la médecine moderne commandent aussi la mise en collégialité des médecins du même hôpital pour prendre des décisions que vous pouvez remplacer par ce qu'il a dit, par la responsabilité sociale. Là, c'est la responsabilité professionnelle. Bon, mais est-ce que vous pensez que la responsabilité professionnelle est moins importante que la responsabilité sociale qui a cours en Afrique?
Okay, thank you so much.
Vous répondez déjà à une première question. Si vous pouvez achever votre propos avant d'enchaîner sur cette question, parce que je vous ai coupé pour passer la parole à...
Yes, the question you asked earlier to Professor Valentin Ngalim, I think what you said about other perspectives taken into account, it is actually in line with the idea of global bioethics. A global bioethics which is not the universalization of European Western values, because predominantly the values that are employed in the documents, that the international guidelines that are used in different settings throughout the world are largely Western, based on Western-oriented values or Western philosophical values. I'm talking about utilitarianism. I'm talking about Kantian deontological ethics and things like that. Such that the values that actually inform and guide the practice of medicine, even traditional medicine in China, in the Oriental world, in South America, in Africa, are usually very much neglected. Therefore, and in each setting, we talked earlier here about maybe the medical setting in which decisions about healthcare, decisions about end of life are taken in consensus within the African context. This approach is completely inexistent in international guidelines. And therefore, what global bioethics, the proponents of global bioethics, I'm thinking about people like Harvey, I'm thinking about people like, what's his name again? De Vries, I've forgotten the other name. there are quite emerging voices today which are saying that bioethics has to take into account other cultural, ethical perspectives, or else it's going to be kind of ethical imperialism or moral imperialism, which is a new form of imperialism in the domain of ethics and things like that. So we need to hear other voices because we do not share in the world the same perspectives about health, about well-being. Perspectives differ. And in order to actually respect the dignity of these people and for bioethics to fit within their context, we need to understand their beliefs, their values, their customs and practices as far as healthcare and health is concerned.
Professeur Tosam, vous avez évoqué un concept qui me semble assez important, le concept de dignité. Bon, la dignité, est-ce une valeur métaphysique intangible ou est-ce une construction historique? Professeur Ngalim, à quel niveau situez-vous la dignité humaine? Quand la responsabilité médicale en Afrique est sociale et non professionnelle, est-ce que vous pensez qu'un échec médical, qu'une erreur médicale pourrait être interrogée dans un contexte où c'est la totalité de la société qui participe aux soins? Dans le système moderne, lorsqu'il y a erreur, on peut accuser le médecin, on peut accuser l'hôpital. Lorsqu'il y a faute, on peut faire la même chose. Et ne pensez-vous pas qu'il s'agit, dans la pratique médicale africaine, d'une médecine sans responsabilité personnelle ou professionnelle et que peut-être cela pourrait détourner notre monde moderne à souscrire tout simplement à la médecine moderne parce que là, on peut indiquer la responsabilité. Oui, oui.
Yeah. In fact, that could be one of the critical issues to be raised within the context of the practice of African traditional medicine, the idea of social responsibility, and then that there is no one to assume responsibility at the level of this practice. And for that reason, people may like to take over to modern medicine because there you have the person to assume responsibility. Mm-hmm. I think we have to be very careful because in the context of the practice of African traditional medicine, there is consultation. And that consultation is not only physical. There's a degree of assumption of responsibility. Mm. Yes, there's a degree of assumption of, we cannot just dismiss the idea of assuming responsibility.
Est-ce que responsabilité essentiellement théorique ou
not necessarily theoretical. There is consultation at the level of the physical and the spiritual and the supernatural consultation in the practice of medicine. Because the medical practitioner in African traditional medicine does not carry an activity without a particular instruction that is given to him. You have, let us look at the sources of knowledge in ancestral revelation. Ancestral revelation. So an African traditional practitioner is working on the instructions that have been given to him through the own sources of acquiring knowledge, which cannot also be neglected.
So you trust in ancestral revelation?
Yeah, that's the means in the transmission of knowledge within Africa, yes. It's a source of knowledge.
S'agit-il encore d'une dimension philosophique de votre personnalité?
Yeah, yes. Ancestral revelation. Yeah.
Et vous situez ça à quel niveau de la philosophie?
Épistémologie.
Épistémologie.
Oui.
L'épistémologie de l'ancestralité.
Yeah.
Bon, professeur Tosam. Je voudrais que vous insistiez plutôt sur le concept de dignité que vous avez utilisé tout à l'heure.
Okay, thank you so much.
Tu situes la dignité à quel niveau? C'est-à-dire, à partir de votre prise en charge ancestrale de la personne humaine, ou alors est-ce un processus historique qui va déterminer la dignité, ce qu'on entend par dignité en long?
Before I respond to that question about dignity, let me just quickly say a few words about the idea of responsibility within the medical setting in the Western Orthodox medicine and within the traditional African setting. I think within the traditional African setting, there is responsibility. Like Prof Ngalim just indicated, it is medical decisions are taken as a matter of consultation, as a matter of consensus. And here I talk about communal responsibility. It's shared responsibility. It's not the individual responsibility that guides decisions, most decisions from a Western, predominantly Western perspective.
Comment la responsabilité pourrait être communautaire alors que celui qui soigne directement a des connaissances supérieures par rapport à celles des personnes qui participent juste?
That's a very important question. That's a very important question. Now, the traditional healer, I mean, a traditional healer, traditional healer, I mean, a true traditional healer, because there are so many quacks today. Charlatans, in other words, today. A true traditional healer, first of all, investigates whether or not he or she can handle that particular health problem. Okay? He consults with the patient, with the family, before any decision is taken. And if it's even a trial, yeah, within modern medicine, that's it. If it's a trial medication, he says it, he indicates it, and he seeks the consent of the patient and his immediate family, community, before any action is taken. So that's why we talk about communal responsibility. I think this is an issue which we can actually discuss as separate.
Si la responsabilité est communautaire, comment mesurez-vous objectivement la répartition des responsabilités? Parce que le professeur Ngalim a parlé tout à l'heure de la communication avec les ancêtres.
Oui.
Ça veut dire qu'à un niveau de l'échec, les ancêtres pourraient être responsables, auquel cas, va-t-on continuer à consulter les gens qui ne sont pas avec nous, mais qui ne peuvent aussi assumer la responsabilité des actes qu'ils posent parce qu'on ne peut plus les punir? Pourquoi rattachez-vous la fondation de la médecine africaine à un monde parallèle? Parce que si les mondes au moins étaient superposés, c'est-à-dire si l'action des ancêtres agissait immédiatement sur nous, est-ce qu'on pourrait encore faire recours à la recherche d'herbes? Ils nous guériraient une fois. Pourquoi avoir besoin de... Alors que nous cherchons nous-mêmes les plantes, nous cherchons nous-mêmes la connaissance, mais on les consulte pour quelle efficacité?
No. There is one thing I need to indicate here. The knowledge that is transmitted is even the knowledge of plants. And even the procedure of the treatment is transmitted through ancestral revelation. And you say the ancestors don't assume, no, they do. Because they have catered for the needs of the patients. And if in case that the treatment cannot be successful, the ancestor will reveal. If it is not possible, they will reveal. But that's why you have the different means of divination that will be carried out. That's why divination is one of the means of the diagnosis and to know the process of treatment. That is to testify whether this illness will be treated or not. And I want to correct something.
Are you an African or an African Christian?
No, I'm a Christian from Africa.
Now, let me just say, the ancestors simply, or the world, the supernatural, or what you maybe want, supernatural or paranormal world, is simply one aspect of that holistic world. The natural, the ecological environment is also an aspect of it. And it is not founded only on the supernatural. It's founded on all aspects. And we, humans, are simply one.
Est-ce que vous pensez que cette préoccupation n'existe pas dans la médecine moderne? L'holisme dans les pratiques médicales, c'est-à-dire la santé holistique, la prise en charge de la totalité de l'être.
With the rise of modernism, this spiritual dimension, okay, spiritual ontology, was almost banished.
Are you sure?
With the rise of it is resurfacing. it is resurfacing now, but with the rise of modernism, for close to 3 centuries, we completely pushed that dimension to the background. And more now with new publications, with new discussions and things like that, people are realizing the importance of the holistic dimension of the human person. That's why psychiatry, psychoanalysis and things like that, they're coming into, but maybe in the next 25 years or so and things like that, we may get back fully. And there is the reason, or there is the invitation for us to go back, to get back to some, I underline the word some, of pre-modern worldview. Because the complete condemnation of the pre-modern worldview was a mistake. If you read the works of the American pragmatist, is it John Dewey? On spirituality. He has influenced Protestant writings a lot. Okay, you read even some modern authors like Spinoza. You actually see some elements of this holistic and pantheistic conception of the universe, which there is some kind of a rediscovery of this perspective today. Yeah. So, but you asked the question about dignity. I look at dignity from a very there are different dimensions of dignity. The religious perspective, the philosophical, moral perspective. I'm thinking about Kant and things like that. But the perspective in which I look at dignity here is the perspective in which my values, or your values, that is the human values, that's cultural, historical, even political and economic, are respected. When you respect the person I am, then it's my dignity that you have respected. And in the context in which we are discussing, the context of global bioethics, which I used the word dignity, you respect someone's dignity when you listen to that person to hear that person's perspective. And it comes from that idea that nobody, no culture, no individual knows everything exhaustively, completely.
Yeah.
We each know something which we can share with others, no matter how taciturn or no matter how backward economically that person or that community may be, they have something that the other may learn from. And you respect that community's dignity by listening, by taking their culture, by taking their history, by taking their values, beliefs seriously, because such beliefs define who they are and gives meaning to them.
Est-ce que vous pensez à cette réalisation artificielle de la dignité humaine, ou alors vous pensez qu'il s'agit d'une détermination a priori, que l'homme arrive au monde déjà déterminé par la nécessité d'être considéré comme un être de dignité? Je pose la question parce que vous aimez beaucoup l'Afrique ancienne. Or, dans l'Afrique ancienne, les populations étaient les sujets d'un roi qui parfois avait le droit de vie et de mort sur ces sujets. Voyez-vous? Et à ce niveau, pensez-vous que la dignité individuelle pouvait être acceptée? Ou alors, ne voyez-vous pas que la dignité de chacun était déterminée par un monarque, parfois totalitariste, et qui commandait sa volonté à d'autres?
I think in that context, that would have been just political manipulation, because the ontological status of every being has to be asserted. Yeah, because it depends on, every being has a right, and an a priori right to life, and the ontological status of every being has to be asserted. That is why I think we are born with that dignity. We don't acquire it because it is given by a particular monarch or whatever.
Professeur Galim, quand je pose la question, c'est parce que les hommes n'ont pas toujours été sédentaires. Les hommes ont commencé comme des nomades, à la recherche de quoi manger.
Oui.
Bon, aujourd'hui, pendant la période où l'homme était encore dans le nomadisme, que pensez-vous de la dignité quand pour se nourrir, il faut bousculer un peuple précédemment présent à un endroit pour s'installer? Voilà comment s'est fait le peuplement dans l'histoire.
Yes.
Quand vous dites que pour vous,
Yeah.
Il existe des principes inamovibles
Yes.
Qui nous déterminent par nature à être des êtres libres.
Yes.
Vous savez ce qui s'est passé avant que le code de Nuremberg, voilà, le code de Nuremberg en 1947. Pourquoi? Les essais médicaux étaient effectués sur des personnes. En Allemagne, par exemple, dans l'Allemagne nazie, on ne leur demandait pas leur avis avant de faire des tests médicaux sur ces personnes. Bon, est-ce que, voyant cela, même en Afrique du Sud, pendant la politique de l'apartheid, on utilisait des êtres humains comme des cobayes pour des essais médicaux. Bon, au vu de tout cela, la dignité n'est-ce pas une construction historique et essentiellement historique? Est-ce qu'il existe un principe ontologique à la façon d'Aristote de penser qui imposerait en chacun de nous un principe de dignité qu'il faudrait respecter a priori?
No. In my opinion, there is an a priori principle of the ontological status of every creature that has to be asserted, not a historical construction. I wouldn't see the dignity of a person as a historical construction because these historical constructions are founded on manipulation and interest. And I don't want to resort to scriptures to justify my position, but I'm thinking that from the perspective of nature, every creature has every creature has a right to its existence.
Ok, professeur Tosam, vous voyez bien que l'approche du professeur Ngalim est assez théologique et dans la tradition chrétienne, parce que il parle de créatures, voyez-vous. Bon, d'abord, pensez-vous la même chose que lui? S'il dit qu'il est africain et qu'il vante les mérites de la médecine traditionnelle africaine, bon, est-ce que les Africains, dans la perspective précoloniale et pré-esclavagiste, se pensaient comme des créatures? Est-ce qu'ils ne se pensaient pas comme le résultat d'une succession d'événements ayant eu lieu dans la nature, jusqu'au moment où la terre devient vivable, les êtres humains commencent à être là? Est-ce que vous entrez dans la perspective chrétienne? Et si vous êtes dans la perspective chrétienne, à quoi sert-il encore de célébrer la position africaine?
Let me quickly respond to the question about dignity, and then I connect to this. But I must say that we have to be careful not to completely go out of the topic, which is the point of our focus in this debate.
Non, c'est parce qu'il a parlé de créatures.
Yeah.
Bon,
So,
je vois que sa conception de la dignité est chrétienne.
The question of dignity in contemporary bioethics is a very, very hot topic. For those who support the idea, who defend the idea of the application of certain technologies, certain biotechnologies, genetic engineering and things like that, like Peter Singer, like Ruth McLean, like John Harris, and so on, they think that the dignity of a human person is based on the capacity of that person for rational thinking, consciousness, self-determination. For others whom have been classified...
This is an historical perspective, no?
This is a purely philosophical approach. They look at it. Not historical,
we are talking here as philosophers now.
The point of view of the fact that the human person can be able to determine his or her value, or to decide to make medical decisions. As opposed to some humans like embryos, like those in comatose situations or vegetative situations who cannot decide, okay? But somebody like Francis Fukuyama thinks that he talks about an X factor. I don't know what he actually puts as an X factor, but I think the sense in it is that the X factor is that innate capacity of being human. It is not based on our capacity for self-determination, for our capacity for us to define our own meaning that makes us have moral worth or dignity, in other words. Now, you're talking about the question of, within the African context, the pre-colonial situation and things like that. I would say that within this setting, we actually respected the dignity of individuals. I'll just give you some examples. within the pre-colonial African setting, rape was evil, even though people largely moved around naked. But today, rape is still a very morally bad thing. Today, because some people move almost half naked, they say it's an easy justification, or it's a reason why it provokes rape and things like that. But no, the idea of moral value, the idea of valuing the other, and incest, for example, was seen as something very, very unacceptable. Okay, so within that, yeah, it is still within that pre-colonial setting where we had slavery, we had people use others, wars and things like that. But I think that the idea of humans using others as means to other ends is a universal human weakness, which did not only happen in Africa, all right? As late as the 1930s and 40s, we saw that with the Nazis and things like that. You see? So, and in societies in history, far deep into history, we have seen such behaviors. And I think that the idea of respect of human dignity, the respect of human values, has always existed. But gradually, as societies see how much human beings can degrade into the bestiality, instruments, documents have been put in place in which they emphasize respect for human dignity. Today, we are talking about the dignity even of nature, respect of nature and things like that. So it's a very controversial concept within the domain of bioethics, contemporary bioethics. But like I said earlier, my view from the perspective of global bioethics, to respect somebody's dignity is to listen to the person's perspective, the person's value in the application of such principles, and not impose alien or values that are coming from other cultures that do not actually fit within the belief system, within the moral.
J'ai un problème avec vous parce que vous pensez la bioéthique quand vous la ramenez à l'Afrique et vous parlez comme si l'approche africaine ne peut pas être critiquée.
Oh,
j'ai insisté sur la responsabilité médicale. Vous avez parlé d'une responsabilité communautaire.
Oui.
Si la responsabilité est communautaire, ça veut dire qu'on ne peut pas sanctionner un échec médical. On ne peut pas sanctionner une erreur médicale. Parce que qui va-t-on sanctionner? Qui va supporter de porter la responsabilité en tant que personne directe ayant commis la faute? Autre chose, comment sait-on que la communication qu'on a entre guillemets avec les ancêtres est telle que vous soyez sûr d'avoir posé des bonnes questions à ce que vous appelez les ancêtres?
Yeah, in fact, I'm happy you have come back to this because there is an assumption of responsibility within that context, because the person to whom the instructions are given, who is the healer, assumes the responsibility because he's working in the name of the community. That's the person who, but to testify about the instructions, the communication with the, let me use the cultural compatibility theory to justify this ancestral revelation. Let me also take another tradition. Look at the Hebrew tradition. How were ideas communicated to the persons? Was through ancestral, the revelation. Revelation is testified. Look at the Pentateuch, the Old Testament. You see that there is ancestral revelation. I'm using the compatibility of different cultures to testify that it is not only an African reality. This is something that is testified, and it is based now on the interpretation that the individual healer receives. And that is why he carries the responsibility in the name of the community, because he is the one to pose the argument. So there is assumption of responsibility. We cannot say there is no assumption of responsibility.
Professeur Tosam, est-ce qu'il doit y avoir une bioéthique pour l'Afrique, une bioéthique pour l'Occident, une bioéthique pour l'Amérique, une bioéthique pour l'Océanie? Ou alors la bioéthique doit être une approche objective de la perception des sciences de la vie?
The ethical problems that new developments in science and technology raise have universal implications, or global implications, to put it that way. They have global implications. I am not saying that there should be some kind of moral relativism in the observation or application of principles of bioethics. I'm simply saying that when bioethics is taken within to a particular context, it should also respect, it should also take into account the context, the setting in which such principles are applied. If you're applying maybe the principle of autonomy, like Pr NGALIM indicated earlier on, you should understand that within this context, within a communal context in which it is consultation, it is a reconciliatory kind of approach which is cherished over individual self-determination kind of approach, you have to take into consideration such values. Okay? It's not about saying that, okay, once it comes to our environment, it has to respect. Some of our environments can be dysfunctional. I want to connect to the question you asked, whether traditional African approaches are not open to criticism. No, they are open to criticism, of course. And it is an approach in which we simply not just say that copy a certain approach because it is African. That will be committing the same error we are accusing others of imposing their values on us. It's about examining these values and actually critically scrutinizing, appraising them, and then applying all of those values that are objectively promote the values of the human person. Yes.
Mais la question sera répondue par qui voudra prendre la parole. Les urgences. On parle des urgences à l'hôpital, emergency. Quand le cas a fait un accident et que vous voyez le sang couler, vous avez les malades dans quelles urgences? Les urgences de l'hôpital moderne ou les urgences de l'hôpital traditionnel? À ce moment-là, comment vous orientez-vous?
Yeah, I talked about complementarity. In order to handle such a case in the emergency, you attend to their physical needs and at the same time their spiritual need, because in our thinking, everything that happens has a cause.
Voilà.
Nothing happens for nothing.
If you are talking about décolonisation, comment allez-vous, en tant qu'Africain, désigner l'urgence dans le contexte moderne? Allez-vous changer les noms, le jargon médical que vous allez utiliser?
Emergency.
C'est emergency, non?
Oui.
Voilà. Est-ce qu'il y a lieu de décoloniser ou il y a tout simplement lieu de fonctionner avec ce système tout en sachant que même si les concepts utilisés pour désigner les instruments médicaux sont des concepts occidentaux, il n'en demeure pas moins que la pratique est fondée en objectivité, donc sur la base des principes universels. Parce que, est-ce que ça veut dire que pour vous, il y a des catégories de maladies qui sont soignées dans la médecine traditionnelle et des catégories de maladies qui devraient être soignées? Dans ce cas, à quoi ça sert de vouloir opposer la médecine africaine à la médecine traditionnelle si les deux jouent le même rôle? Est-ce qu'il ne faut pas plutôt penser, on revient à la même question, à codifier la médecine africaine?
I'm not talking about, I will not talk about opposition. I'll talk about collaboration. Yes, I'll talk about collaboration. I will not also say that there are certain health problems that must be cured in the modern medical setting and those that must be cured in the traditional medical setting. I would rather say that there are certain medical conditions that can be better treated in the modern medical setting, and there are certain medical conditions that can be better treated in the traditional setting. And that comes back to the idea why I support an idea of collaboration.
Professeur Tosam, à ce niveau, est-ce que vous n'êtes pas plus dans une approche anthropologique que dans une approche philosophique? Parce que je sais que je pose des questions à des philosophes.
Oui.
Mais vous m'apportez des réponses quelquefois essentiellement réservées aux anthropologues. Bon, maintenant, vous en tant que philosophe, pensez-vous que l'Afrique devrait encore s'enfermer dans un système, et dire ça c'est la médecine africaine, au lieu de tout faire pour entrer en compétition avec le système mondial et montrer que ce qu'on découvre en Afrique peut également aider le monde?
Yes, this your question helps me to clarify one problem. I talked about ancestral revelation under epistemology. We have to be very careful. There are no iron walls to branches of African philosophy. Yeah, because an aspect which is placed under epistemology could have metaphysical as well ethical and ontological, cosmological implications. So they are together. We don't have very straight iron walls. So the problem I was saying, it involves African philosophy, but as far as we are talking about the problem of being, and the problem of how do we perceive being in the practice of medicine, we are not, I don't think we are going anthropological, because anthropology is taking us back to culture, but there is now the philosophical dimension, because we are looking at the question of being and how this being is going to be treated be handled within the context of African traditional medicine.
Yeah. Est-ce que vous ne croyez pas que ce sont les réalités mentales qui divergent d'un peuple à l'autre, qui vous font croire qu'il faudrait qu'il y a une médecine pour l'Afrique, une médecine pour l'Occident? Je dis ça parce que un malade, quelqu'un peut être malade et vouloir à tout prix n'obtenir le traitement que d'un prêtre. Et le même prêtre va utiliser les comprimés de l'hôpital qu'il mettra dans l'eau, faisant semblant de bénir de l'eau, et le malade pourrait guérir. Les prédispositions psychologiques qui changent, pour vous, devraient-elles déterminer la prise en charge du malade, selon qu'on est en Afrique ou en Occident?
I didn't get the question. Can you state it again?
Est-ce que ce sont les prédéterminations psychologiques d'un malade qui devraient déterminer la nature du traitement? Ou alors, doit-on, à partir de la conversation avec le malade, l'amener à comprendre que voici le système qui te permet de guérir le plus facilement possible, de façon à ce que s'il était sceptique, qu'il se convertisse à la capacité d'accepter ce qu'on lui propose?
Now, I'll come back to that question. Let me just say this about the method. You say it's not really philosophical. I think it's not true. When I talk about collaboration, when I talk about the coexistence between two traditions and approaches, I think John Dewey has talked about the transactional method. Yes, it is actually this method I'm talking about. There's a work I'm working with a number of philosophers and it's a paper and some persons in the medical domain. It's collaboration. Bioethics today is more interdisciplinary than. So, to respond to your question, it is important. It is my position. I think this is that every tradition of medicine is based on a certain metaphysical, or if you want, anthropological understanding of a person, of a human person. So even the modern mechanistic view is based on a certain anthropological understanding of a person. And if you have a clear, for you to treat, to have, for medicine to have an effect on that person, the physician has to understand that anthropological understanding of the patient.
Ok. Nous sommes presque au terme de cette émission et je voudrais proposer ou demander au professeur Ngalim de nous donner le mot de fin. Que devons-nous retenir de cette émission?
Oh yeah, thank you very much. I think we have to take into consideration that there are realities in African life that has to be taken into consideration in order to improve the well-being of each and every individual. That medicine is both physical and spiritual.
Chers téléspectateurs de WafricaTV, nous sommes arrivés au terme de cette émission. Nous avons reçu deux enseignants venus de l'université de Bamenda, le professeur Ngalim Valentin et le professeur Tosam Jérôme. Et les deux sont en train de monter un projet qui suppose que nous sommes en pleine renaissance africaine au plan philosophique. Je pense que les prochains entretiens pourraient nous permettre d'approfondir ces notions à l'instar de santé globale, bioéthique, et très prochainement, nous pourrons arriver plus loin dans l'approfondissement de cela. Et nous voulons remercier toute l'équipe qui a collaboré avec nous pour la réalisation de cette émission. À la présentation, je suis professeur Mouchili de l'Université de Yaoundé 1. Je vous remercie, chers téléspectateurs.
Thank you.
Ouais, méfie-toi.